All right guys, we're getting the Ecodiesel Wrangler ready to sell, and I wanted to make a video going over how it has held up over the 5 years of ownership that I've had it. How has the Jeep held up, and how have some of the mods held up? Some of these mods have been here since I bought it. We modified it. So I wanted to make a video being thorough and super honest and talk about how the Jeep has held up and how the mods have held up, and help you guys with some of your mod planning, or if you're thinking about getting a Wrangler or an Ecodiesel, this should be super helpful. Or if you're interested in buying the Ecodiesel JL, this will be a full disclosure video. Everything that I think is wrong with it or don't like about it, or how things have held up or worn out, everything's going to be in this video. As well, if you're interested in buying it, I'll put an email address here. You can reach out to me and inquire, but it needs to be here in person in BC. And I will not ship it, and I have no idea what it's like getting it in the States. That's for somebody that might be interested in buying it to figure out. Let's go do a walk around. My Ecodiesel Wrangler is just about 5 years old. I bought it brand new in March of 2020. It has about 60,000 kilometers on it, and it still kind of is mind-boggling to think of all the crazy adventures that I've taken this on. Everywhere from Death Valley to the Rockies in Canada, to Moab, Utah, to the sand dunes of Oregon. I'm gonna miss this Jeep. But let's start this off by doing a walk around of the outside. Overall, the paint is in pretty good condition. I had some custom made paint protection film pieces added to it right after buying it, and it's done a pretty good job at protecting the paint, despite driving through all the branches and trees and bush that I do on all of my trips. Looks like I have a few souvenirs that have wedged themselves between the body and the adventure rack system. And this is probably my biggest complaint to this rack, is that it catches a lot of debris. I'm going to remove this protective film before I sell it. As you can see, some of the edges are starting to get pretty dirty and grimy. You just can't really clean it up. I'd say 5 years is pretty good life out of this film. I don't have any film on the upper part of the Jeep, but I really haven't found much scratches make their way up there, and white does a pretty good job at camouflaging any that did. Most of them tend to drag along the sides of the doors, and that's where the film really adds a lot of extra protection. And I'm going to get this detailed and get all the moss that's growing off it removed. I also cut some strips of protection film and put it on all of the hinges, which really cut down on the number of chips from rocks being kicked up from the tires. I couldn't fully cover the hinges, so there are some little small chips, but it's done a pretty good job at keeping them away. I didn't put any protective film on the fenders. There is a little bit that comes from the factory that does help, but as you can see, some of the rocks that get kicked up miss that, and any of these black spots are where the paint is missing. Having the extended metal cloak flip steps sticking up from the side also cut down on some of the rocks that can actually get thrown up and hit the doors. Here's a little more evidence as to why we need to remove the protective film. You can see all the edges just don't come clean anymore, but the hinges on the driver's side were protected as well, and I think it did a pretty good job. I would recommend doing this. The worst amount of body damage I have was actually from a rack that I installed early on before the adventure rack system, one that braces itself on the side of the body panels. And after the first trip out, I noticed it was starting to damage the paint, and it left some small impressions in the body. So we removed that and got rid of it and went with something much more robust from Metal Cloak. The driver's side isn't quite as bad, but you can see there's just a small impression here right above the gas cap where the support was leaning against the side of the Jeep. I went with a tire carrier and bumper combo from Warren Industries, which has held up pretty good, but I do have a few small complaints. The first one is where the license plate mounts. It really mounts too close to the body, and because the bumper's mounted to the frame, they move independently of each other, and you can see that the license plate frame has really marred up the side of the body here and looks pretty scratched. I'm going to leave the bumper on here, kind of hides it a bit, but I would definitely slice off a chunk of this if you were going to install this on your Jeep, because you can see when it comes into contact with the body, it's going to remove some of the paint. Up here in Canada, pretty much anything that is unprotected is going to get rusted, and some of the hardware and the mounts for the adventure rack system, as well as the bumper, seem to have rusted over through the winters. This could be replaced pretty easily and repainted if you really needed to. The tire carrier is also showing a little bit of rust where the support sits when it's closed and locked in place. It's rubbed off the powder coating, and of course the exposed metal has started to rust, as well as some of the hardware that came with the tire carrier. Overall, it hasn't really affected the functionality of it, but I do find that the tire carrier needs adjustment frequently, otherwise it does squeak when it's on the body. It also puts a ton of torsion on the body and frame. As you can see, the bumper is wiggling and then the body wiggles in a different direction. Now I've gone through 3 different roof racks on my Wrangler over the course of the years. Right now we have 1.5 of them on. I'm going to sell this with both the Adventure Rack system as well as the Rhino Rack backbone, which is what I was currently using for my rooftop tent. The Rhino Rack backbone has to drill through the roof in order to install it, and that can cause some leaking if you're not super careful with sealing it up. It does give you a nice low profile design, but I don't think it is as stout or as robust as the Adventure Rack system. And the overall weight rating for dynamic loads and off-roading is just enough to put my rooftop tent on. Where the Adventure Rack system, you could probably put a bus on top of your Jeep. And I had a rooftop tent on here and ran the Rubicon with it and had 0 problems and 0 complaints. So I'm going to sell it with both racks. I'm going to leave the front hoop on with this and as well the crossbars, and so whoever buys the Jeep can have their choice of which racks they want to run. Now the one complaint I have with this is if you're not really careful when you install it, the clamps that go on the rails can actually touch your window frame. And it's settled in after the initial install and I didn't notice this, and on one side the clamp was bumping the paint and did a little bit of damage there. You can't really see it behind the hoop. And since then I've come up with a method for installing where I wedge a 2x4 in there and then get everything bolted down, and then it's been good ever since. And I still have the rails and the rest of the rack, so we can easily package that up for the new owner of the Wrangler. The Rhino Rack uses a frame that you install inside your roof, which bolts to the tub of your Jeep and then transfers the weight from the roof through the metal frame down into the tub, giving it that ability to have more weight capacity on the roof. But I think this is good for light to moderate off-roading. If you're going to be hitting some really hardcore trails or things like the Rubicon, I'm not sure how durable this would be long term. And drilling the holes in the roof means that you could possibly get water through, which I did, and this washed all the fiberglass dust through with the water when it rained and it landed on my seat and doors. I think a good detail will fix all of this, but we'll see. Having the cloth seats has definitely made this more of a problem. If it was leather, we could probably just wipe that off, but I'm going to see what my detailer can do. And just to be clear, this is no longer leaking. We sealed up all of the holes really good, and I haven't had any problems since we went back and fixed it. A lot of people have asked me how I got such a low profile look on the roof. I use the low profile alu cab crossbars with the Prinsu 1-inch mounts, and this has let me get the tent as close as possible to the roof and still be able to bolt and unbolt it, and I really like the look of it. And even without a rooftop tent, the Wrangler looks pretty sharp. The front hoop is also really good at protecting your A-pillars from tree branches, smashing them and denting them. As far as wind noise goes with the hardtop, I don't really get any wind noise from any of the rack. When there is a rooftop tent on there, there's a little bit of wind noise. When I had the soft top though, at highway speeds, the noise was almost unbearable. Now the other thing that's slightly out of place is my Metal Cloak Overland flip steps. These aren't made for hardcore wheeling yet. I took them on the Rubicon, and after quite a few bashes of the Jeep on rocks, they did bend a little bit. The passenger side is definitely bent more upwards than the driver's side. This isn't really their intended use, but you can see they still survive. And if you really wanted to, you could probably take them off and bend the bolts back so that they were sitting flat again. But we've rubbed off a lot of the powder coating and probably could hit them with a bit of a spray bomb, but it's looking a little bit rusty where there's no powder coating. The other thing that developed after adding the Rhino Rack was a bit of a squeak in the roof right here next to my head. I've tried everything to try to get rid of it, and I can't quite seem to pinpoint it. It isn't the worst thing in the world because other things in the Jeep squeak and rattle when you're driving and off-roading, but I did want to point it out. And it wasn't there before we put the Rhino Rack on, so something to do with the way that it's compressing the roof down and the freedom panels is causing some sort of clearance and squeak issue. Speaking of squeaks and rattles, let's go around to the back of the Jeep because I have the Tuffy security deck in here and it makes a lot of noise. This thing rattles and bangs, and if you don't have a lot of weight on it to hold it down, it gets even worse. Now I've made that even worse by putting these D-ring hooks on it, so I usually keep those strapped down so they're not flopping around. And going underneath the Jeep, the other thing that I noticed a little while ago is my drive shaft boot has come off, as well as the seal on the Zeppa joint, I believe it's called, has let loose, and you can see some of the grease has sprayed around the underside of the body of the Jeep. This hasn't impacted performance at all. The drive shaft still works. I can still go off-roading, but I think at some point it should be replaced. As for the front drive shaft, it seems to be holding up pretty good. We have an Adams off-road replacement drive shaft, which I put on right when we did the lift kit. And I haven't had to replace anything on this, just grease it occasionally. And then by occasionally, I mean barely ever. I have all Terraflex control arms on here. Overall, they've held up pretty good. I think this front one might need a new bushing. I have replaced a couple of the bushings on the rear ones. There's a little bit of play in this, and you can notice it sometimes when you hit a bump. But overall, the rest of the control arms seem okay, and I can't really say too much about the Terraflex control arms other than they've held up for 5 years of abuse, and that's been pretty good. Now, the one thing I want to point out with the suspension is I do have Clayton springs in the front and rear, and they have given me a great amount of lift, especially with all the weight and skid plates and armor that we have on here. But I do have a bit of a problem with the front ones, and you can see how they bow a little bit. The bigger problem is when these unload, they get stuck on the bump stops and then release. And so you hear a loud clang that sounds a lot like a U-joint going. If you go watch the Rubicon series, you can hear this happening quite often when I'm going over rocks where I have to articulate the front axle. I do notice it if I go over a curb or speed bump unevenly and one side goes up before the other. Overall, it hasn't affected the driving at all, and I think the Jeep drives really well. It's more on the firm side, which I think is pretty good, but something to notice with these springs. And I still have the front springs from Terraflex, which we could always throw in there if somebody wanted them when they bought the Jeep. I've been running the Falcon 3.3 shocks since new, and I think they've done really well. They've held up pretty good, but I have had to replace the bushings on the rear ones once. I think the shock ride overall is pretty good. I don't ever really adjust them, I just have them set on the middle setting. But I noticed just a couple of weeks ago that this passenger side rear shock might be leaking a little bit. So I'm gonna see if I can get that looked at and maybe warranted before we sell it. I don't think the ride has changed at all, but there's a little bit of grease that's on the boot and it's leaked down onto the bushing. So I think that would be good to get addressed. Now I do have the full metal cloak undercloak skid plate system on here, as well as the plate for the rear where the def tank is and the muffler. I did take this off due to a clearance issue, and it hasn't really been a problem except when I went on the Rubicon. In the Rubicon, we landed on a boulder on the back and it dented the muffler a little bit, but the skid plate was interfering with my track bar bracket, and it was causing the skid plate to bottom out on the bolt. So you weren't even getting full suspension travel. It was actually very uncomfortable to drive. I don't know if maybe a fabricator could whip something up to fix that, but I just took it off and really didn't find I needed the rear skid plate too much, as I don't go to the Rubicon very often. But here you can get a great look at the entire undercarriage of the Jeep, and it's protected by the gold metal cloak undercloak armor, which is being absolutely bulletproof. Otherwise, it's protected the bottom of the Jeep for tons of scratches and bashing on things and even getting high centered on boulders in the Rubicon. And they even included a little hatch that you can remove to drain out any water from the fuel filter, which I've had to do once in my entire ownership of the Jeep. As for tires, I have the Nitto Trail Grapplers on here, which this is the second set of tires. I put over 40,000 kilometers on the first set of tires, and they were barely below half tread. We have about 15,000 kilometers on these tires now, and I think they are doing pretty good. I have a brand new spare, which I don't rotate in. That is because I keep a sixth tire on deck in case I blow a tire. I can put two brand new ones on. You can see just how much we've worn these down in about 15,000 kilometers. Not too much at all. As for problems with the mechanicals of the Jeep itself, if you guys go back and watch some of the old videos, I did have the emission system completely replaced once under warranty. It was like a $5,000 warranty hit, but I haven't had any issues with it since. And now with skid plates under there, it's kind of a pain to get to if you have to take it to a dealership. But haven't had any real concerns since I had that issue. I did have a check engine light once when we were towing, but without towing, I haven't had any problems. The other thing that I did have fixed under warranty was I had the keyless entry system having an issue, and they ended up replacing the door handle on the passenger side door once. It was just freaking out whenever it got wet and would just start unlocking and locking the Jeep. But that was covered under warranty, so not too much concerns there and haven't had any issues since. And I have had a weird issue with the driver's side taillight. I noticed there is a little bit of condensation in it, and every now and then I will get a code saying that this light is out. I'll see if I can get a replacement taillight if it isn't too expensive, but you can see just a little bit of condensation in the backup part of the light, and perhaps that's why every now and then it decides to freak out. As for the motor and the engine bay, the Ecodiesel is hands down my favorite engine option that you used to be able to purchase with Jeep. It's not available anymore. If I were building another new Jeep, I would look for another Ecodiesel, to be honest, one with really low kilometers, and maybe lighten the emission system a little bit right out of the gate. I have aftermarket switch panels and lots of extra wiring put in here for lights and to run other systems and devices, which I'll be keeping all of this in here. So whoever's buying this is getting a really premium setup with things like Baja Designs lights and Warren winches, and maybe I'll leave the signature yellow Ultra hook on the front. As far as replacing things in the engine bay, I've replaced this battery twice. The OEM battery failed fairly quickly. I replaced it with a Motormaster battery from a shop called Canadian Tire up here in Canada, and they just warranty it anytime I have a problem, so I just pull it out and they give me a new one. It's got a 5-year warranty. The auxiliary battery on this is completely dead. I just really need to remove it. It doesn't charge anymore, and it stopped giving me issues and errors quite a while ago, so I've just left it. But I do have a brand new fresh auxiliary battery sitting in the garage that we'll throw in this for whoever wants it. But I'm gonna get this engine bay totally detailed as well as the rest of the Jeep. Otherwise, no complaints about the Ecodiesel other than if you want to tow with it. I don't recommend towing with this. Maybe if you had it tuned and did something with the emission system and re-geared it, it might make a difference, but I didn't really need to do any of that, and I don't tow very often at all. Let's go inside and talk about a few things going on in the interior. Now I'm gonna leave the overhead rack in, but I am gonna be pulling out my communications radio as well as some of the wiring for my dash cam. As far as water leaks go, I have experienced 2 leaks, only with the hardtop, never with the soft top. One is when I park the Jeep with the nose facing down and the driver's side a little bit low. It seems to accumulate water right at the T-junction of the freedom panels and will leak a little bit. This is why I park in this direction, but I've never had it leak when I'm out camping or off-roading or driving or anything like that. But on the passenger side, every now and then I will get a little bit of water dripping right here on the door. And what I've found is the bolts from the roof seem to back off after time. I don't know if this is directly related to the Rhino rack installation or not. We've tried Loctiting them down, but every now and then I just pull the freedom panels off and do those 2 bolts back up so they're nice and tight, and the leaking goes away on the passenger side. Other than that, I don't ever see any moisture entering the Jeep, which has been great. Now, one downside I think to running this Tuffy security deck is you don't get any airflow going to your tailgate hatch. So you tend to get a little bit of dampness coming in around the back, and this bamboo slide out on the tailgate table seems to collect mildew and mold from time to time over the winter when it's super rainy. You can see right here. I'm just going to give this a wipe down with some bleach and a little bit of a sand, and it seems to be pretty good. But on the cooking side, looks totally fine, no issues. And I love having a tailgate table, and I've forgot my little Gerber gear chopper. So we're gonna take that out because I'm gonna keep that. I really like that little knife. As for the hardtop, I did buy this used, so it is missing a couple things like the windshield wiper, as well as the defroster doesn't work. Because I ordered mine with an OEM soft top, I don't have those plugs anyways, so it's no big deal that they were removed from the previous owner. I did install the light along the top of the glass, which has the wiring that's coming down. This wiring could be extended out quite a bit, and that would allow you to route this and tuck it away and hide it, but for now, that's what we have. As for the material on the seats, I think the cloth has held up really well, but I do have one complaint. The zipper has broken and separated on the back of the seat, and I can't get it closed back up. You don't see it when the seat's up, but it's something I did want to note that this has happened on the back of the seat. The driver's side, which gets the most wear and tear, is held up really well. I think it looks better than leather after 50 or 60,000 kilometers. There's just a little bit of creasing on the material, and other than that, there's no real wear and tear on it at all. Now, my passenger side, unfortunately, hasn't had the same luck as the driver's side. While wear and tear hasn't been an issue, I did have a branch come through my open window once, and it did rip the seat a little bit. I think if you get some fabric glue and glue that down, it would look nearly as good as it did originally. But I think I'm gonna see if I can find some covers to put on the seats that might upgrade this maybe to leather. Maybe we'll get those on before we sell it, but there is a little tear here, and as you can see, if you put a little glue on there or stitch it up, I think it'll look pretty good. I don't think it's a huge issue, but once again, I'm calling out everything that's going on with the Jeep. And I really have no complaints about the cloth interior. They're nice and cool when the sun's hitting them in the summer. They do have heat. I don't regret going with cloth at all. Now I will leave the 67 Designs rail in here, but I am going to take off all my mounts and balls and everything like that as I need them, because I need to transfer them all over to the Demonator. And I will leave this JCR overhead rack in here. This is not the Epic chromoly system, as that wasn't out when I put this in, but I'm gonna pull my bags and fire extinguisher and window brake tool and radio all off, as I mentioned before, as I need those. I have noticed that the steering wheel has started to develop a little bit of a squeak when you turn it. I believe that is due to the sector shaft brace that I have mounted on it, as it does get a little bit worn out over time. I have heard other people complain about it squeaking, but it does give you reinforcement so that your sector shaft doesn't snap or break when you're off-roading on some rocks with your big 37-inch tires. It's just a little bit more peace of mind, and somebody could pull that off, but it's kind of a pain, so I'm just gonna leave it on and disclose there's a little bit of a squeak sometimes in the steering wheel. I noticed a little while ago that my speaker for my communications radio starts to have a little bit of a hum and whine to it that correlates with the RPM of the engine. I believe this is due to some regulator on the alternator no longer working like it used to. I haven't always had this noise on it, it's just started to develop. I think if I put some sort of filter on the power connections, it'll probably remediate that. But if somebody else is putting a radio in here and doesn't know about that, I thought it was worth mentioning. I also installed a trailer brake controller in here from Red Arc, which I will be leaving in here. I see no need to take it out and have no other use for it. But the knob is right down below by your knees on the front dash. So that's about as honest and candid as I can be with feedback after 5 years of the Ecodiesel. It's been a great run, but with the Demonator back online and fully ready to go, I just don't have the need for 2 overlanding and adventure rakes. So we're going to be selling the Ecodiesel. You can email me here at this email address. I'll put it down in the description below as well. But please, guys, only if you're serious and if you're planning to come out here and actually get it. I'm not going to ship it. I'm not parting it out. We're not taking anything off it. It's going to go exactly the way it is, other than the few little things that I still have to take off that I mentioned in the video. And I'm going to miss it. I really do enjoy the diesel. I don't think it's going to be my last one. Maybe we'll build a diesel Gladiator down the road somewhere, or maybe Jeep will come out with a new power plant that we can take a look at. But it's going to be the end of the Wrangler here as soon as it finds a new home. With that said, guys, thanks so much for watching. Hit that subscribe button. Leave me any questions down in the comments below that you have about this video. Check out some of the awesome other videos of reviews and adventures on the channel. My name's Casey, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.